In the spring of 1962, the highest-ranking officers in the U.S. military, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, all signed off on a top-secret plan. It was hand-delivered to the Secretary of Defense, meant for the President's eyes only. Now, this plan wasn't about defending against a Soviet attack. It wasn't a secret strategy for Vietnam or a plan for a crisis in Berlin. This plan was codenamed Operation Northwoods. It called for the US government to unleash a wave of terrorism on its own country. It called for bombings in American cities, for hijacking planes, and for murdering American citizens on American soil. Why? To fake a wave of public outrage, to trick the American people, and to create an excuse for a full-scale invasion of Cuba. Now, the story you've probably heard is pretty simple. President John F. Kennedy saw this insane plan, was horrified, and shut it down immediately, saving the country from a nightmare. And he did reject it. But that's not where the story ends. It's barely where it begins. The official version, the one we're all comfortable with, covers up a truth that's way more complicated and a lot darker. What Kennedy really knew, the sheer madness of the plan he was shown, and what he did next, what he deliberately chose to hide from everyone, that reveals a secret history of the Cold War far more terrifying than the one we think we know. This story isn't about the monster that was stopped. It's about how its existence was buried, and the chilling questions that decision leaves behind. To even understand how a document like this gets created, you have to remember what the early 1960s felt like. The Cold War wasn't some distant chess match. It was a real, daily fear. The US and Soviet Union were in a nuclear stare-down, and it felt like the shadow of communism was creeping across the world. And just 90 miles from Florida, that shadow had a name: Fidel Castro's Cuba. For the military and intelligence agencies, Castro wasn't just some annoyance. He was a major threat, a Soviet-backed domino in America's backyard. And that fear got a turbo boost after the massive failure of the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961. That disaster didn't just fail to overthrow Castro, it made the Kennedy administration look weak on the world stage. The pressure on Kennedy was immense. Inside his own government, there was a powerful group of military leaders, guys who were used to winning wars. Out of that frustration came a new, aggressive anti-Castro program called Operation Mongoose. Kennedy himself authorized it in late 1961. Its goal was simple: use any means necessary, sabotage, propaganda, covert ops, to bring down Castro's regime. It was in this anything goes environment that the Department of Defense was asked to come up with military options. So, on March 13, 1962, General Lemonster handed his answer to Defense Secretary Robert McNamara. The document was titled Justification for the U.S. Military Intervention in Cuba. We know it as Operation Northwoods. The most shocking thing Kennedy kept hidden was just how brutal and depraved those plans really were. We hear the term false flag attacks, and it sounds clinical. But the actual document isn't abstract. It's a detailed menu of atrocities written in the cold, bureaucratic language of a military memo. Kennedy wasn't handed a vague idea, he was handed a blueprint for mass murder. The Joint Chiefs proposed a communist Cuban terror campaign in Miami, other Florida cities, and even Washington, D.C. This wasn't just about a fake bomb scare. The plan called for actual bombings of civilian targets. It talked about framing people for bombings they didn't do and staging funerals for mock victims to whip up public anger. The document literally says the terror campaign could be pointed at Cuban refugees seeking haven in the United States. Let that sink in for a second. The plan was to attack the very people who fled Castro's Cuba, to murder them in their new home, and then to blame the government they had just escaped. The proposals even included sinking a boatload of Cuban refugees on the high seas. The document notes this could be a real or simulated event. The coldness is just staggering. Whether the people who died were real or just actors was treated as a minor detail. The deception went to the skies too. One of the most insane plots involved a civilian airliner. The plan was to charter a plane, fill it with a list of passengers who are briefed on the role they are to play, and have it take off. The flight would pass near Cuba, where it would send out a fake Mayday call, claiming it was being shot down by Cuban jets. Then the broadcast would be cut off and the plane was supposedly destroyed. But really, the plane would be a drone, a copy of a real one, which would have secretly landed at a secure US base. And who would be on that fake passenger list? The document suggests the passengers could be a group of college students off on a holiday. The goal was to create an image of Cuban evil by faking the murder of innocent American kids. They even had a plan for true American hero, astronaut John Glenn. As he was making his historic flight around Earth, the Joint Chiefs proposed that if his capsule were to tragically explode, they would immediately realize irreversible proof that the fault lies with the communist et al. Cuba. And then there was a modern version of a famous American war cry. The document explicitly proposed creating a Remember the Maine incident, a callback to the mysterious ship explosion that started the Spanish-American War. The 1962 version was even more twisted. The plan was to blow up a US ship in Guantanamo Bay and blame Cuba. They even talked about publishing fake casualty lists in US newspapers to cause a helpful wave of national indignation. Kennedy saw all of this. He read all these details. He knew his top military commanders had signed a document that said murdering Cuban refugees, American students, and US soldiers was perfectly fine to achieve a political goal. Yes, he rejected the plan, and that was critical. But he also chose to stay silent about it. He never told the public, he never told Congress. The American people had no idea that their own military leaders had drafted a plan to kill them for a lie. Kennedy's decision to bury Northwoods also meant burying this planned betrayal. Allied governments never knew they were scheduled to be the victims of a US terror and propaganda campaign. Hiding this was essential to keeping America's foreign relations stable, but it came at a cost. It meant, once again, that the radical, the ends to justify the means thinking in the Pentagon was never dealt with. The Northwoods document shows that the Joint Chiefs, international law, and alliances weren't principles. They were just obstacles you could get around with lies. They saw their allies not as partners, but as an audience that needed to be fooled. Kennedy knew this. He knew the rot in his military command went that deep. And he chose to keep it a secret. Another time bomb that was only disarmed because nobody ever found out about it. The fact that a plan like Operation Northwoods could ever be written down, approved by the most powerful generals in the country, and land on the president's desk is a chilling reminder of how things can operate in the shadows. It shows you that the guardrails of democracy aren't always as strong as we want to believe. If you think these hidden histories are as important to understanding today's world as we do, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because you don't want to miss what our next deep dive into the secrets of official records don't tell you. President John F. Kennedy's rejection of Operation Northwoods was absolutely a critical moment. A leader chose restraint when he was being pushed towards madness, and he deserves credit for slamming the door on a plan that would have been a national tragedy. But that's not the whole story. The deeper, darker truth is in the secrets he kept. He hid the truly horrifying details of the plan from a public that put their trust in him. He oversaw and allowed a system of secrecy that literally burned its own history to dodge accountability. And he concealed a plot that included the betrayal of America's most important allies. You can understand why he did it to avoid a crisis of faith in the military, to prevent the government from collapsing in on itself, and to hold alliances together during the Cold War. But keeping quiet has consequences. It allowed the twisted thinking behind Northwoods to just fade into the background instead of being dragged into the light and destroyed. It left Congress and the public blind to the real dangers brewing in their own government. So the story of Operation Northwoods is really two stories. It's the story of a president who, in the moment, made the right choice, but it's also the story of a system that was, and maybe still is, capable of producing the absolute wrong one. The very fact that we have these documents forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question. We only know about Operation Northwoods because it was turned down. It really makes you wonder, what other plans weren't just rejected, but were successfully erased from history altogether? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching The Hidden Media.